Assad moving these weapons around, are you suspicious of this, and if so, why?
Well, I think everyone would be. The optics certainly don't look good. And if anyone had been giving Assad advice, and that includes the Russians, they should have told him not to do it now. It strengthens the French and the U.S. belief that any resolution from the Security Council must have Chapter 7 as a sanction if they don't cooperate. Now, there is a missing piece of information which the U.S. government should have. That is, were they moving the weapons from well-known large chemical weapons storage facilities to someplace else, or were they moving them from small sites into these larger assembly sites, which would tell you maybe they're doing it, in fact, consolidate so they can declare what they have easier and they can be inspected easier. But on the surface of it, all you can say is it looks like rope-a-dope, cat and mouse, and cheat and retreat, which we've been through with Saddam.
When you talk about Chapter 7, you're talking about the potential for the use of force if the resolutions aren't followed through on. But that idea that maybe it's just consolidating weapons for inspectors, that's not something you would normally do, is it?
Well, I normally would not expect that help from this regime. But I wouldn't rule it out. Look, this is going to be a difficult enough inspection process. We don't need to speculate. What we do need is very quickly get inspectors on the ground and find out. But like I say, I'm amazed that this took place. I thought the Russians would have had a better understanding of how this would look and how it would drive suspicions. Apparently not.
Chris, you wanted a diplomatic solution. Do these movements of chemical weapons, that concern you?
Of course it does. It's a shell game, basically. You know, Assad has played this game a lot over the last several months. I mean, if you go back to December, he was moving all this stuff around, and there was all these concerns on the part of the administration. Not as many people were paying attention back then because we hadn't had the sense of crisis. Same thing in May. And the administration, in some ways, or at least people talking to the press in Washington, have telegraphed all kinds of measures that they're trying to take. There's a group called Unit 450 that basically is in charge of these weapons. Well, you know, there have been people in Washington saying to our correspondent, for instance, Eli Lake down there, that the U.S. has been trying to recruit the members of Unit 450. There was a point at which, because the U.S. was trying to do that, Assad was starting to talk to militias about maybe them taking some of the chemical weapons. It really is like watching a shell game where you know which side of the nut has a pea under it.
Also, I mean, the truth is this is a regime which has just lied repeatedly from the beginning. I mean, besides even before this conflict began, but from the beginning they have been lying and you know, using when Kofi Annan was there, you know, negotiating with him on the one hand and intensifying attacks on Homs on the other hand.
Yeah, and I think that is eventually going to work against Assad. If he continues to play that kind of game, he'll find himself in the position that Milosevic was in the Balkans eventually, where nobody trusted anything he said, including when the Russians acted as guarantors for his word. And if that is the case, then if we were to move toward military action again, there would be a much broader consensus behind it.
David, when we hear about them moving these chemicals, before we had talked about how dangerous it can be to move chemical weapons, to make them leave the country in order to destroy them. So what is so dangerous about the idea of moving them around? And does that raise a concern for you if he is in fact?
It does raise a concern, Anderson, because in fact, the road network, and while you're moving these weapons, they're the most vulnerable to ambush and attack. The Syrian road network is not secure. It's neither secure physically because it's been heavily damaged in some parts, and you've got the rebel forces operating along it. The weapons themselves are also dangerous. It's quite common to have leakers, and all it takes is a truck turning over and you've got a chemical weapons accident on your hands.
But aren't they in precursor? I mean, aren't they separate chemicals, and it's only when they're combined together that there's a lethality?
No, these are the binaries, and that's not all of them.
Okay.
He's got mustard, which is not a binary, and he's preloaded some of his strategic weapons, everyone thinks. So I don't know what he's moving, and I don't think anyone does. The critical question right now is to find out from where to where. But I agree with Christopher Dickey. Look, the optics of this is horrible. This is a regime that you never use trust and verify. You never use trust in the sentence because he's lied so often. That no one does believe his word.
And David, I've heard you say that you believe boots on the ground is inevitable now.
I do.
Why?
I mean, the more you look at the numbers of what you think you have and how long it's going to take you to do it, I don't think you can give security to the inspectors, maintain 24/7 watch around the weapons that whatever number are eventually disclosed by the regime without having a military force of some type on the ground to do this.
But Chris, I mean, the idea that they would allow U.S. military personnel in that country, that even
Well,
if the U.S. would want that.
It's a stretch. It depends on how much pressure can be put on Assad by the international community, by the United States. I mean, there were, if you look back to the weapons inspection after '91 in Iraq, which David Kaye was running, there were some amazing showdowns in parking lots where things were being refused. He was insisting. He had the backing of the international community and the potential backing of American military force, but he didn't have troops on the ground. In this case, it might require something like that. Let's hope not, because then the troops will just become targets themselves.
Chris Dickey, appreciate it. David Kaye, again, thanks for your expertise.